What's up, my foodie family? I hope you're all eating well. Thank you for coming back to the channel. Today I'm gonna share another episode of turning positives into negatives with you. I feel these episodes are very important because a lot of people won't share their bad times with you. They will only share their good times with you. But I share my bad times with you as well, so you can know that I'm a human being and I go through the same things everyone else go through. But I do my best to turn those negatives into positives and still push through. Just keep on moving, even though bad things are happening. I'm still productive and I'm still creative and I still keep going no matter what. So even though things hurt me, and I want to shut down at times, I don't. I keep going and I use that energy that I want to shut down with and turn it into production, turn it into productive energy. I turn it into creation, and I use that for me to, like a springboard to jump forward. And so I turn all my hard times into good times by using those hard times as springboards to get me to the next level based off of the things that I've been through. Okay, so today, I want to talk about how men are taken advantage of at a young age sometimes. And, we all know that women have been taken advantage. There are some women who have been taken advantage of, also at a young age, by older men. But it also happens with younger men as well. But a lot of younger men, look at it as, cool points. They want to do it and then talk about it. They want to, be intimate with older women because they think it's cool and they're going to get points for it, and it's like a notch on the belt type of thing. But a lot of times we don't realize that there's damage being done there, but it's being done over time, and later on in life it could be more difficult for those young men who were intimate with older ladies to have relationships because having a relationship with an older lady is not the same as having a relationship with a younger lady. So you know, and honestly, that's how it was for me. I had been taken advantage of when I was a teenager by women who were in their early 20s, which that's not too far off. I was like 14 or 15, talking to women who were 21, 22, things like that. But at the time, I thought it was cool. I was doing grown stuff, being around grown people, and, I didn't see a problem talking to these older women. So, you know, uh, later on in life, it got to a point where I was having trouble with relationships. You know what I mean? But in the beginning, uh, I didn't realize that there was a big difference. Talking to older women and as opposed to younger ladies my age. See, older women, they have their own places. They have their own cars. They can buy alcohol. You know what I mean? Like they have their own money, and then once you date a woman like that, and then you go back to dating women your age, who most of them weren't driving, most of them didn't have their own income, and if they did, it's just a teenage income, and no, younger ladies weren't able to, get alcohol, they weren't able to get smoke, they weren't able to do things like that. Well, they could, you know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not possible to happen, but it's a lot easier with an older woman who has her own place. You're not sneaking around trying to figure out, where we can go, where we can drink at, where we can hang out at. You go right to the older woman's house, hang out there, drink with her, smoke with her, you know what I mean? And nobody asks a question. No, you don't have to sneak around at all, per se. And, so after the first older woman that I did deal with, like I said, I tried to go back to younger ladies my age, but it just wasn't the same. The freedom wasn't there, being able to do whatever. It's like we were always, like I said, sneaking around, trying to figure out whose house we're going to hang out at, blase, all of that good stuff. So so after my first relationship with an older woman, I began to seek other older women, because they could provide what the older woman before me provided. And so these older women, they were perfectly okay with, like I said, smoking and drinking with me and also being intimate with me. Like, it wasn't a problem at all. And I didn't see it as a problem. Of course I wanted to be intimate with the older women. Why not? You know what I mean? So because of that, like I said, younger women my age, younger ladies my age, they weren't necessarily, being as intimate, as older women were. It was a different stage. Younger ladies, they're still coming into who they are. At that age, most people are dating, to say most people are, walking around holding hands and just being young and living a young life. You know what I mean? But and then you get to then as a young man when you're dating a woman, a younger lady your age, you can talk about young things, so you can slowly grow up. You know what I mean? You can slowly date and you can slowly get a feel for who women are. But when you're dating older women, they've been young already. They've done that already. So they don't, it's nothing about, holding hands, walking around, talking. Don't get me wrong. Some older women might do it. That's fine. But not the ones I was with. It was all about smoking, drinking, being intimate, just having fun and doing whatever. So, but the only thing with that is the older women wanted to move on quickly. I was a kid, I was a child. I didn't have a whole lot to offer. So, other than just being a fling, what else did I have to offer? So after a couple relationships like that with older women where the relationship was fast, all we did was smoke and drink and be intimate, I began to believe that that's what relationships were. You know what I mean? So as I pursued other older women, I would approach them with intimacy. I would approach them with you know smoke and with alcohol, because I thought that's what the situation was. And even when I got older and I began to, talk to women my age, I would still lead with intimacy and I would still lead with alcohol and I would still lead with sex because it had worked so well. And I thought that's what women wanted because they would, they had that, they were okay with it and they moved on afterwards. So I thought, a relationship was, smoke, drink, be intimate, and then move on to somebody else. And then, it got to a point where later on in life, it became hard for me to have relationships with women because we weren't really communicating, we weren't talking. I was more worried about smoking and drinking and being intimate, and then when the smoking and drinking and being intimate was done, you know, I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know. Of course, we could watch TV, we could do whatever, but there wasn't no really good communication. So it always hurt the relationships. And then I, got to a point where it was hard to have a relationship at all. Because there's just a complete disconnect with women because I never got used to communicating with them. You know what I mean? I would usually meet these older women in situations, like I said, where I was being grown, where people were hanging out, older people were hanging out, and I'd be hanging out with them, and then so I did grown up stuff. So like I say, in the long run, that ended up hurting me because you know I didn't have that communication. I didn't have those communication skills with women. I wasn't used to you know walking around holding women's hand, holding young ladies' hands, talking about young stuff, and slowly growing up, slowly introducing dating into my life, and then slowly getting to learn how young ladies function and how to maneuver through certain situations with women, with young ladies, and then getting better at maneuvering through those situations because if you go through those situations enough, then you learn how to deal with them. I didn't have to learn how to deal with those situations because it wasn't about slowly dating and communicating. It was about having fun and partying. So that's what I thought every relationship was about. And I'm not going to sit here and blame everyone else. The older women. Of course, it's my fault. I was hanging around with older people. I wanted to do grown things, so I put myself in situations where I was doing older things. I was being with older women, and everyone was okay with it. It was not a problem at all. Nobody wanted to call the police or say this type of statutory rape, or what I'm saying. It was none of that. You know what I mean? It was completely cool. But like I said, in the long run, it hurt me because I didn't gain those communication skills. But that was my fault because before I really realized what was going on, I was, man, I was older, in my 30s, you know what I'm saying? But even still, I didn't know what to do. You know what I'm saying? I didn't know how to approach the situation to get better at talking to women. You know what I mean? I had been so used to talking to them, with intimacy and, leading with things like that for so long that I couldn't really hold a good conversation. You know what I'm saying? Like nothing seemed interesting to me and didn't really see a point of, having a conversation with a woman just to have a conversation with her. You know what I mean? Like when you lead with intimacy, that's where the conversation is going. But when you don't lead with intimacy, like you have to literally get to know these women. You have to talk to them more, you know what I mean? And then the more you talk to them, you figure out how to talk to them even better. You know, you get better at talking to them. I never had to get better with them. You know, I just put out, you know, some smoke, a drink, what's up? You know what I mean? And like I said, that hurt me in the long run. So my whole goal is to share my story with people so they can with younger men with so they can understand that it's not all glitz and glamour being with an older woman. You know, of course they can provide things that a younger woman can't, but you have to ask yourself, where's the situation going? You know, is this going to be a long-term situation, or is it just a fling? And if it's just a fling, in the long run, that can potentially hurt you. So my advice to younger men, you know, in their teens, is, you know, when if older women approach you with intimacy or with alcohol or, you know, with smoke, no, decline them. You know what I'm saying? Tell them no, it's not worth it, because it's going to stunt how you grow with your communication with women. You know, the best thing, another piece of advice I can give to younger men, teenagers, you know, uh, people like that at a young age, is to, you know, take it slow with women. You know, date them. You know, I've never been on a date in my life. You know what I mean? Like, I've never been on a date in my life. So at this point in my age, I need to start dating. I mean, I don't even want a woman right now. You know what I mean? I'm perfectly fine being single. But, you know, if I do find myself in a situation where, you know, I might be interested in a woman, you know, and we need to go on a date. I get it. I need to get to know who you are. You know what I mean? Like, what's your goals? Where you going? You know what I mean? It's not just about, you know, just being intimate. You know what I mean? And that's what I encourage young men to do. Talk to young ladies your age, get to know them, you know, get good at communicating with them, get good at maneuvering through situations with women, so with young ladies, so you can see how to get better inside of those situations. So later on in life, you know, you can have good communication skills with women. You're not only looking to be intimate, you don't need alcohol and smoke around in order to, you know, have a good time with a woman. You know, you just get to know the woman, get to know what she likes, get to know the younger lady, get to know what she likes, and then, you know, that's how you spend your time, based off of the things that she likes and the things that you like. Man, being intimate should be one of the last things you ever think about doing, because it messes everything up. You know, like I said, in my situation, I felt like all women wanted that. I felt women wanted intimacy because I dated older women who were interested in being intimate. You know what I mean? If I would have dated younger women, you know, younger people are sometimes more scared to be intimate. They never done it before, blase, all of that. But older women are not. Older women are very straightforward, and they will tell you exactly what they want. You know, and for a younger man, I don't suggest that. Stay away from stay away from the older women. You know, and like I said, I don't blame anyone. I'm not pointing blame. I'll take the blame on myself. You know, my lack of communication skills with women is my fault. You know what I mean? It's my fault. But the only thing I'm saying is, the reason I developed that lack of communication is because I went for women who were older. You know what I mean? And whether they were wrong or not doesn't matter. I'm here to do my best to protect younger men. Stay away from the older women. You know what I mean? I mean, you can talk to older women, just talk whatever. You don't. I mean, I don't even think you need to do that, but you know, there's nothing wrong with getting to understand how older women communicate. You know what I'm saying? So you can use that to your advantage, or you can use that to your benefit to understand how women communicate. But get to know women, get to know young ladies, talk to them. You know what I mean? Like, be verbal. Go on walks in the park. You know, walks down the street. You know, hold hands. You know, go walk by the river. Do all of that. You know, but you know, if you take the time out to learn how to communicate with women, with young ladies your age, it'll make it a lot better for you when you get older. You know, you will be able to communicate and get along with women so much better. So, you know, young men, you know, do your best to stay away from older women. Older women, leave the young men alone. You know what I mean? And I do take responsibility for my lack of communication. And like I said in my video before that I made, apologizing to women for the things that I've done, for, you know, being a womanizer and, you know, being disrespectful. And, you know, like I said before, I was trying to get as many numbers as I could. And I was trying to smoke, drink, and be intimate with everyone. You know what I'm saying? I thought that's what a relationship was, and it's not. And I learned that the hard way. So I'm here to protect other young men. Stay away from the older women. date women, young ladies your age, and slowly date and slowly get to know who women are, who young ladies are, and how they operate, and how you can maneuver through situations with them. Okay. Thanks again for tuning in to the channel. Thanks for listening to my spiel. I hope somebody, I hope a young person, hears this and it helps them out, and they can stay away from older women, and they can understand that it's not just about being intimate and smoking and drinking. Okay, so thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Come back next time. Love, peace, and fish grease. Take